Very special man to me, and he has just helped me so much in the short time that I have been here. And I'm so grateful that he was willing to come share with us. And so, Mickey, I would like to introduce to you Mickey from Denver. Are you ready, friend?
You muted. I know all the bells and whistles, not. Um, Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for inviting me to do this. I mean, it's wonderful. I'm seeing people that I haven't laid eyes on in quite a while. And I'm sure they're looking at me and saying, God, how old is this guy? They haven't seen me with white beard and white hair and whatever. I'm 85. No, I'm not 85. Anyway, to be able to share is actually kind of difficult because, and I start every talk I give with this, that I came to Alcoholics Anonymous for 2 weeks of sobriety. I thought if I could get 2 weeks where I wasn't so sick, where I wasn't waking up with my fingers curled up, where I wasn't going out of my mind, I would be so grateful to you, and I'd go on back out and drink. And it wasn't because I was thirsty. I had been drinking from the time I was 5 years old till the time I was 27 years old. And it was just life. It was just life for me. And I came in here and I found Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to 1311 York Street in Denver, where the mother house for so many of us that washed up in there. And I started to attend meetings. Now, I want to tell you about my first meeting. I was about to be fired again in my job, and so my boss and I were having coffee out at the airport, and I was like, I had gone 1 week without a drink, and so I'm dressed up. I got my London Fog raincoat on, and I've got my best duds. And here I am. I'm going to go in and sit with my boss and have coffee. And I thought for sure I'm going to get fired, but I was in advertising. I was in advertising for 25 years. So I sat down and I looked at my boss and I said, Bill, I've got something I want to tell you. I'm a crier, so I'm not getting through this without crying. I said, I'm an alcoholic and I'm going to my first meeting today. And he was a phone freak. So he just looked at me. He didn't say anything. And he got up and he left the table. And I'm sitting there by myself. And I'm thinking, my God, I just lost another job. I am in deep trouble. And so I'm sitting there sweating bullets. And after a while, it turns out he just needed to make a telephone call and left me twirling in the wind, you know. And he sat down in front of me and he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the 24-hour day book. And my boss was an alcoholic and I didn't know it. And God stepped in right then. I didn't have any fancy footwork. I was just dying. And God stepped right in that day. And I didn't get fired. I went over to 1311 York Street for the meeting. We are going to get out of this first day, I promise you. But I got in my group now, and I sit around the table. I know like zero about Alcoholics Anonymous. I just know you had alcohol in your name, and that's what I needed help with. So I sat down around this big table, this round table, and they passed out all these red books. I didn't know what the book was, but I got a red book, so I belonged. You know what I mean? I was an outcast. I was part of the gang. And so we're going to have our meeting. And this woman next to me, I mean, just almost immediately jumped up and she says, I am so happy today. I can't say it. I've got to sing it. And she did. So I'm sitting in my meeting. I got my red book. This woman is standing up singing. And here we go. We're on our ride, right? But it doesn't end there. And then we go to this other guy. You can't make this stuff up. And he was saying about when he got drunk in Philadelphia and broke into the armory and stole a tank. Honest to God. And he said he was looking for the shells when the police arrived. So, you know, if we're ever worried about a newcomer being at a meeting with us, you know, listen, if you've got it and you need it, they're going to stay. So I don't think we need to worry and be really careful and tiptoe around them because the tank is there and this woman is somewhere. So anyway, that's how I started my trip. And I just have to say, Tom, it's so good to see you. I told him that and he leaves. Okay, so that 2 weeks has turned into 48 years, and I never thought that would be possible. And as a matter of fact, it feels surrealistic. I can't relate to it. I'm 75 years old. I got sober when I was 27. And 75 seems surreal as well. And there are people in this community right here that have traveled with me, that I have traveled with. And one of them I've sponsored for over 30 years, two of them. I have sponsored for over 30 years, and they actually stuck around, and I wasn't able to get the hell out of that situation. But they stayed with me, and they've kept carrying me along. What I want to talk about is what I've talked about for over 40 years in AA. It turns out that when I was brand new again, I was sitting in a meeting, and I guess I'd been sitting in that meeting for about maybe 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, and I wanted to kill myself every single one of those days. I just wanted to get out of here because, man, I didn't know what anonymous I could go to that would get me out of this thing that wanted to kill myself. So there was a group of guys, very, very tough people at York Street. And they had a name, and maybe privately we might have given them other names. But anyway, they were really very particular and very, locked in on how you do this. And I learned precision from them. But I had this suicide thing going on. So I went to my sponsor, who was a defrocked Catholic priest who had killed 2 people one night in a drunken haze. And I'm a Catholic, and so we could speak in a kind of similar tongues. But I talked to him about it, and he said, I don't know. And in other words, they passed me up the chain of command. And I ended up with this 6-foot, God knows how tall, sheep herder who was the kind of the leader of the pack, And I sat down opposite him on the porch of York Street, which we did a lot of business on the porch. It was a 3-story Victorian mansion. Beautiful, it still is. So anywho, I said to him, look, I've got this suicide thing going on. And he looks at me and he says, I don't know, man, maybe you're going to drink. That was the advice I got. And I left there and I said, man, what the hell is going on here? So I had, and Sarah kind of coached me on this, that I'm free to talk about things other than strict AA stuff, so I'm going to do it. I would have probably done it anyway, but so I go back home, and I had been reading this book. I'm at the point now where it's probably close to 60 years. I was reading a book called New Seeds of Contemplation, written by Thomas Merton, who is an American monk, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with him. So I go back there, man, and I got nothing. I have got nothing. And so I grabbed his book, and I opened it up and I started reading on chapter 32 to 36 in New Seeds of Contemplation. And yes, that is a commercial. And I'm reading this book and something's happening to me. And what's happening to me is I'm getting my mind blown because everything he's writing about in that book is happening to me right then. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to go drink. I'm right in the middle of a massive spiritual experience. Now, that has a tricky word in it, spiritual, because I was not prepared in any way. I was a cradle Catholic. I was not prepared in any way for what spiritual meant in Alcoholics Anonymous and in truth. So I got this thing and I've got my book and I'm pumped. And what it started was this journey. And I know you guys are probably all well versed in what I'm about to say, but I know that there's some folks who are not. And what I found was there's a dichotomy between what we use the word alcoholism, but you have alcoholism. So we think, okay, if I could stop drinking, then I'm home, and it's moonbeams and butterflies, and it's going to be great. And so what happened, and I was kicked out of every school I went to until I got to, I got thrown in jail in college. But anyway, so I was kicked out of everything, and I don't know why I said that. I am 75 years old. Take my back, Gary, please. I'll drift off, man. Anyway, so it'll come to me. So I was dry as the Sahara Desert, and I wanted to kill myself. So there's a problem here. Apparently getting rid of ethyl alcohol, which is absolutely necessary, P.S., because it'll kill me absolutely. But the disease of alcoholism that we find on page 52, that's a partial list of the calm down, Mickey. Of the, what is it, Joel?
Bedevilments.
Yeah, it's the bedevilments, but that's a partial laundry list of the symptoms of alcoholism. Thank you, Joel. And so and we may ask other people to jump in. This is going to be a real trip tonight. But anyway, and I start talking about this thing. And it's like, I've made this discovery that the disease of alcoholism is not in a bottle. It's not in the bottle. I'm addicted to a non-addictive substance. I want to share a little off story on that one. I was invited up into Oregon to conduct a 65-man step weekend. And I started my talk with, I didn't know any of these guys. I started my talk with that sentence, I'm addicted to a non-addictive substance. And this guy in the front row, and I'm telling you, he wasn't far away from me, raises his hand. And I said, yeah. And he said, that is the biggest load of bullshit I ever heard in my life. So we got the meeting started, So I just looked at the guys and I said, anybody else? And we were brothers then. You know what I mean? We were brothers. But it's true. There are, let's use a mother-in-law statistic. 9 out of 10 people can drink ethyl alcohol with more or less impunity. But 1 out of 10, and these are mother-in-law statistics really, and 1 out of 10 people has got a deadly disease. And this thing can plant them in jail, in the nut house, or dead. So I have that. I have the 1 out of 10. But I'm talking about this thing and I'm talking in meetings and I'm hearing crickets because there was this, it was 1974 when I got sober. And there was this strict view of alcoholism that was about. And I'm not saying universally, but it was there. So for the longest time, I'd be invited to speak. I hung out with Don Pritz and company and Gary and and so it was after a while I got to feeling, what the hell am I jousting with windmills here? It's not. This is not a look at me story. I'm telling you, I'm saying that I found this gold. I found this gold. This is a real disease. The AMA recognizes that. Of course, their understanding would probably be with the bottle as well. It's not that the bottle is taken out of this, but when you do take the bottle out of it, when I took the bottle out of it, I ran into Mickey. And then I understood why I got kicked out of all those schools, because I wasn't drunk when I got kicked out. I was just angry and I was insane a lot of times. And it wasn't on alcohol. It was just on the disease of alcoholism. I remember talking to Gary when I was very brand new sober, and I asked him this very important question. I said, Gary, do you do something if it's hard? And he said, yeah. I said, I don't do anything if it's hard. And that's the way I approached Alcoholics Anonymous. I wanted somebody to feed it to me, to take care of me, and let's go on down the road. And it didn't turn out that way. Bob Olson and Marie and I, well, first of all, Don Pritz would get all of these speaking engagements. You can imagine. I mean, this guy was Mr. Magic. And I mean, he got all of these. So what he would do is he'd shuffle them off to other people. And he'd say, you take this one, And he did that to me one time. And I'm brand new sober. And he says, look, there's a pig roast over on the Western Slope in Colorado, and they need a speaker. And you're it, or you're going to be one of them. And so the day comes, and Don calls me and he said, Mickey, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be on the Western Slope. And I said, they could get anybody to do it. I just didn't go. My self-esteem was so low, I'm not kidding. I thought what was going to happen was that I was going to end up being a janitor in my own home. And so then there came this other thing, and he said, no, I want you to go to this thing. And so Bob Olson and Marie and I got in DC-3. I mean, it's just one of these old, Goonie bird, prop jobs to fly from here to Ulysses, Kansas. So we're going on our way to Ulysses, Kansas. And Bob says, there's somebody I want you to meet when we get there. And I said, okay. And I said, well, how will I recognize him? And he said, oh, you can't miss him. He's got one eye and one leg. So I'm going, all right, I'm going to look for the guy with one eye and one leg. And he said, I want you to ask him to tell you his story about dying. And so I went in, and it was Arbutus O'Neill. I can't remember his name, but it was Arbutus O'Neill.
Bill O'Neill.
Bill O'Neill, thank you. It was Bill O'Neill, who I had never met. And so I walked up to him and I said, Bob said I was to ask you the story about your death. And he said, I don't tell that much anymore, but he says, I'll tell you. And he said, I was drinking so much, and I think it was in a cheap hotel or something. And he said, and they got hold of me and they put me on a gurney, and I was on that gurney, and I went in and I flatlined. And he said it was just flat. And he says, this is going to be a familiar story to you, but it's got a twist. And he says, and so I came up out of my body, And I was looking down and I could see the med techs working on me and trying to keep me alive. And he said, and I saw this tunnel over here. And he said, and there was a light. So he said, I started down that tunnel. So I started down and I got halfway down that tunnel and I got tired. And some people who had died that I knew came to me, and they helped me, and they helped me get up and go on down to the light. So I went down to the light, and a voice said to me, "It's not your time. You got to go back, and you and Arbutus have this tape deal that you're doing, and you got to keep doing that." So I started back down that tunnel, and he said I got halfway down, and he said I got tired, and I sat down, and he said, and some alcoholics in Alcoholics Anonymous came to help me, but they weren't dead yet. And they got me and they took me down to the mouth of that tunnel, and all the meters jumped, and we're going, so I'm going like, wow, Alcoholics Anonymous, man. And I am going to speak at this conference. But anyway, the fellowship and the relationships and the people that I have known for years and years and years that are still here, and they're actually right here in this community, have made Marie and I's life. And incidentally, my wife went into Al-Anon 7 days after I got into AA. And she was lonely. We had a daughter. I was a folk singer, and I was singing in a bar downtown Denver. It was a classy bar. I want you to know that. And I was singing in there, and the boss, this is our first, I had a singing partner. We called ourselves Two's Company. We were folk singers. And so we were getting on with this thing. And the boss said, if it's 9 o'clock and I tell you to start singing, you start singing whether there's anybody in the bar or not. And we said, okay. So we got up to sing, and there was this hostess from across the hall who came in and took her break, and she sat in there and she listened to our set, and she came up afterwards. And she's not as tall as I am. And I looked down at her face and I said to myself and said, I will never let her go. And 3 months later, we were married with a muffin in the oven, and we've been married for 51 years. And that lady has been with me in Al-Anon. Yes, thank you, God. And she's in Al-Anon, and she keeps me squared away. I was having a really tough lift off this morning. And so here was Marie's response. She said, "Do you want to 10-step that?" Which I resented deeply, of course. I mean, come on. The Wazini is not going to, yes, I did. So I 10-stepped it. So anyway, I was trying to think about what I was going to say in this talk. Of course, as usual, I didn't do any preparation. So the point is that I carried this message down through groups and a lot of places, and I felt alone. I remember calling Gary one time. I was in a big, show in New Jersey, and God bless the people who participated in this. I'm not kidding, but it was like drunkalogue after drunkalogue after drunkalogue, and these were like beaucoup seasoned speakers, and I called Gary and I said, Gary, why aren't we talking about alcoholism? And he said, Mickey, that's why we're out there. That's why we're out there. Because this disease, imagine if you were a very devout Mormon, you could have alcoholism and it could run you around and kill you, and you would not know what you died of. I mean, that's serious business. So what happened about 7-8 years ago now, some people in Maine actually heard what I was talking about. And we began to form and it says in the big book, and he will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. And I couldn't believe that they heard what I was talking about and they wanted what I was talking about. And we started to parlay this thing. And let's see. You guys are not asleep yet, are you? Okay. So I'm getting these timelines all screwed up. So I'm going to bounce backwards. A group of us had been carrying the message all around in conferences. And you know, the thing was, in Colorado, we didn't have those intimate conferences. What we had was the state convention, which had break-off rooms for smokers and that kind of a thing, 1,500 people, you know, attendance and all this. And you know, we got to thinking about, wow, we'd like to have something that's more intimate. So we started this thing, which in Breckenridge, Colorado, which we called the Breckenridge Conference. And we had Gary as a speaker, we had Don as a speaker, and we had other folks who spoke. And that was our first Fellowship of the Spirit conference. And there were about 250 people there. And Tom was there, and Juanita, and on and on and on. So so we got the venue. We told Don, we'll get the hotel if you'll get the people. Well, God, if Don goes to get the people, you got to have people. So we got this thing cooking, and we started the conference. And I took a break one day. Now, this conference was such, you talk about Fellowship of the Spirit. The people from Santa Fe would bring, you know, their dishes, and the people from Louisiana would bring the shrimp etouffee, and all this. And we would come to each other's rooms, and we would eat a little bit in each other's rooms. And then I was walking through the room, and there was, I'm not going to call him a bourré. Okay, well, anyway, there was this Louisiana guy that was there, and he was talking to a girl from New York. And oh, good, it's a spam call. Anyway, he was talking to this girl from New York, and she leans over and she says to him, "Now, where was that fourth column you were talking about?" And a kind of a radar goes up in here, and they're talking about things in the big book, and they're sharing this information. And I'm going like, it gives me goosebumps right up my back. Something's happening here in this conference. So I took a break after that, and I went out on the balcony of the hotel, and I saw this guy standing out there by himself. I just wanted to see the mountain. I just wanted to see the mountains, and get a little break. And I looked over at him, and he had these tears just running gently down his face. And I didn't know him, and I just walked over to him and I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Would you mind if I ask you why you're crying?" And he said, "Oh, we're here from," what's that?
Muscatine.
Muscatine. I thought it was something like Muscatel. Muscatine, Iowa. Muscatine, Iowa. Thank you very much, Tom. You guys are going to save me. I love this. Anyway, he says, there are 4 of us here from Muscatine, Iowa. And he says, I've never seen so many people working the program out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So this blessing just hit us full force. And incidentally, before I forget it, this is our 30th year. This is our 30th Fellowship of the Spirit Conference coming up this summer. Please come and be with us. You're so invited to be with us. So anyway, with this small group of people, we started to talk in this language. It was like the language is in the big book, but there's some kind of an awareness that we're finding out that this big book is so profound in what it's saying. So it's like you could say a sentence and I could say a sentence, but it's not necessarily that we're going to meet in the understanding of that sentence. Does this make sense? Because we get blessed by the power of God. We get a chance to live in the fourth dimension. And I don't mean visit the fourth dimension. I mean live in the fourth dimension. And I will starve to death without it. I will literally starve to death without that fourth dimension. So, and it's an invitation into that. And I've seen people's lives changed like so profoundly. And I've seen them change before that, but not like this. So we have this gift. I took a guy up there who was 10 years sober. I just started to sponsor him. And it was one of the years. And he was a Delta, Ranger, Green Beret, whatever. I mean, he had all of that stuff. And he was just there, pardon me, for one meeting. And he grabbed me after that meeting and he said, Mickey, I got to start my program over. We call it the Miracle on the Mountain. This is another commercial. You could feel it, right? Anyway, but we call it the Miracle on the Mountain. And the miracle actually happens, and it truly does happen. And then we get in cabins up in Estes Park, and we'll get together. We'll pack as many people as we can into a cabin, and then we tell the story. It's like an oral tradition about who started this thing, how does it work, what's going on, and it touches people, and it touches us in a way that makes us want to come back and want to be with each other. At one point, we had 60 people come down from Seattle. I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years they came down like that before they started their own conference. We would have 60 people just absolutely come and inundate us and be with us. This is the joy of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I want to come back, and if I say anything that jars you, well, I'm still going to say it. Getting sober in my first 3 years was like joining the Marine Corps. It was bully boys. There were bully boys in there, and I remember I asked one of these guys to sponsor me. And he was dealing out some harsh stuff in the coffee lounge and coffee room. And I stood up and I said, I've had enough of this. I'm out. Color me gone. He said, you can't quit. And I said, watch me. Watch me, because that's not love. That was abuse. That was truly abuse. And they loved the power of that. And what's happening now in our conferences, in our meetings, is that there's love and vulnerability. There is no alpha dog that's going to lead the pack. This is really about us sharing from our souls to each other's souls. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And I've met with people who really think what we talk about is kind of nonsense. Because don't you know, it's really about ethyl alcohol. I do know about ethyl alcohol, but it's not, not drinking is not going to keep me alive. It's not going to keep me alive. So I want to talk about sponsorship. I don't know anything about casual conversation, and so here we go again. 25 years sober. 25 years sober. I had not had a sponsor truly for over 10 years, maybe even 15. And you know, I would confer with my brother wizards, you know what I'm saying, and we would have talks about the higher elements of whatever horseshit that we were on to that day. But I didn't have a sponsor, and I wandered off this path, and something was happening to me that I did not know was happening to me, and I was in such danger. So a suicide is a person who the road to suicide is where it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until there's only one option. Until there's only one option. I was broke. I had a little ad agency with a telephone that didn't ring, and we were just out of money. Marie would fight off the bill collectors, and I would have told you money didn't mean anything to me, but boy, when you don't have it, it gets desperate. It really gets scary. So what happened was one day, Marie went home, and I slithered out of that chair at my desk down to the floor, which was AstroTurf. I mean, this is first class stuff we're talking about here. And I'm down there on that floor, and I could see the phone up above me, and I couldn't get to it. And the sun started to set, and I got my knife out, and I thought, this is it. I mean, I can't take it anymore. I cannot do this. And so I entered this zone. So if we want to characterize hell as the absence of God, that's what I went into for 4 hours. I would not recommend this to anybody. I wouldn't even recommend flirting with this, even ideating it. But of course, we're not in control of all that, are we? But in any event, 5 minutes, I would say I'm going to do it in 5 minutes. And 5 minutes came, and I think, God, I'm going to go into shock. And forgive me, I'm going to make a mess on this floor. And if I could get out that back door, I wouldn't make a mess for these people. And I'm going to get out of that door, and I know it's going to be cold. And I couldn't stop it, and I thank God couldn't start it. So I've got that knife there, and by the grace of God, I fell asleep. And I woke up in the morning, and I had met this woman in Minneapolis speaking up there, and I really liked her. And she talked about this guy in Minneapolis who was a deep breather, man. And this guy had the mojo, and I needed help bad. So I called her to get his number. And so she answered the phone, and I told her what was going on, and she got all her A books off the shelf and got them in her lap and started to 12-step me. And I'm listening to her, and I said, she has everything I'm looking for. And I asked her to be my sponsor, and she said no. And incidentally, I forgot a part of this. Going down in this, there were two things that I would say. One of them is, I can't breathe. And the other one is, can I have a cookie? I just wanted something sweet in this miserable descent into hell. I can't breathe, and can I have a cookie? So anyway, I dial the phone, and she's talking to me, and I'm listening, and she was going to give me his number. And I said, really, would you please be my sponsor? And she said, look, I'll be your sponsor until you can find somebody in Denver, and I'll help you that way. And her name was Cookie. As God is my witness, her name was Cookie. I never put two and two together. So even in the worst, God hears us. So I got a cookie. And incidentally, she was a phenomenal sponsor. She's passed, but boy, she really took care of me. One of her favorite phrases was, "Mickey, you think you can think anything you want." And that's dangerous for me as well. So anyway, how's this for the most disparate talk you've ever heard from an alcoholic? But these are the things, these are the mileposts in my life. So I survived that. And then God, in his infinite sense of humor, put me on the road. I'm back on the circuit. And I go to this place. I don't know what the actual name is now, but they call it Spam Town because that's where they manufacture that wonderful treat, Spam. And so this was my first talk after laying down to commit suicide. And I'm up there at the podium and I'm telling them, because we owe each other the truth, don't we? And I'm telling them what's going on. So, how at the end of a talk, people will come up and shake hands or give you a hug or whatever. I'm standing up in front of the podium and there's nobody. There's nobody. And this one guy comes all the way across the hall and comes to me and he said, "Never stop telling the truth." He was an over the road 18-wheeler. Never stop telling the truth, because we need it. Because this is no joke. This is no joke. And what's incredible, we are living signs of the existence of God, because there is nobody, no medicine, no shaman, no nothing that can keep us sober. Only God. Isn't that something? And the book also says, and we can help when no one else can. So we're invited into each other's souls. What an amazing opportunity. I'm afraid of airplanes and I'm afraid of flying. I just am. I had an airplane riveted to my rear end for so long in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm really just doing Zoom things now because I'm afraid of airplanes. So what happens when I'm in an airplane and it gets bumpy? I get scared. So what I do is I start praying the rosary for the other people on the airplane that are scared. You don't have to believe anything I'm about to tell you. So I pray my rosary for them. I pray mostly just Hail Marys for them so that they will be okay and they won't be afraid. And I was doing that coming back from I don't know where by myself one day coming into Denver, which incidentally, flying into Denver over the Rocky Mountains is guaranteed to shift your dentures. But anyway, so I'm coming in and I'm going to stop there because I'll pick it up. I'm going to preface this thing. As I told you, I'm afraid of flying. So Maria and I were invited through Don to go to a powwow in the Black Hills of South Dakota on the Native reservation. And so we went there and we were with the Native Americans. And incidentally, if you ever get a chance to be in a powwow or a meeting with a Native Americans, put your seatbelt on, because I promise you, they'll just plant their feet right there and they will tell you straight up what's going on with them. It's amazing. It's wonderful. So during that thing, they took and the reservation is dry. It's dry. So during that, there was a break and we heard this ambulance. We decided to take a walk and stretch our legs. This ambulance flew by us and we didn't think much of it. And we went back and there was one of the Indians, his name was Tuffy. And Tuffy got up to the microphone and he said, "My nephew and some guys went off the reservation to get alcohol. And he said, I just held my nephew in my arms, and he was dying. And he said, and the priest got to him. And when the priest came, he said that the meters all jumped, and he gave him the final rites, and he died in my arms. And he said, and I just didn't want to be alone. So that was the level of the conference. And there was another guy, I forget his name, but it was like something, but his last name was Pawnee Leggings. I loved being with those people. They were just wonderful. So that's a preface. So we go there. It's about a 2 or 3 hour drive from Rapid City, South Dakota to this reservation. So we get in our car, we go back. And it is snowing, like sideways. And so they had to just get us in a hotel. So we get up the next morning and we get back in that airplane. And it's like there's a 50-mile-an-hour crosswind on the ground. And I am scared to death. And the Blessed Mary, Mother of God, came to me and she said, Mickey, I will be with you in this airplane. I will go with you all the way home. I will tell you when it's going to get rough. I will ask you to hold my hand and I will see you home. And my mother has never stopped doing that for all these years. And that was the reason I tell that story, is because I was praying the rosary back to the other airplane ride, and we're going in, and I'm praying this thing, and she starts talking to me again, and she says, you have no idea how far into heaven you are right now. So, Sarah, am I supposed to shut up here in about 3 minutes?
No, go as long as you want to.
Oh my God, don't tell me that. I didn't know if I could say anything, so I won't go on and on. Thank you. So where was I?
Blessed Mother.
Thank you. And so what has happened in this thing now? We're going to go from that to Caroline Myss. And I see some smiles. We go to Caroline Myss, right? And I was given that book by some friends in Taos, New Mexico. They saw me just crumbling. I was just shocked, man. And they gave me this book, and like a very responsible member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't look at it for probably a year. I mean, who needs that, right? And it wasn't a book, it was tapes. So I started listening to the tapes, and this book is called Spiritual Madness. Spiritual Madness. Now, it's never been turned into a book. It's this talk she gave in Boulder, God knows how many years ago. And tell me, we're going to have to go to France after this, so please remind me if I get tied up in my stuff here. But anyway, so I was listening to her talk, and I'm hanging on to my life with everything I've got. And I took 35 pages of notes from her talk because she talked right to my soul. And she said something in that book. She said, if you can't sleep at night, get a book, a notebook and a pen, and have it by your bed and say to God, I'm right here, talk to me. And write down what you get. Now, it's not like, automatic writing or, levitating off the bed or anything or whatever. That was 22 years ago, and I have 400 pages of the guidance that I have gotten from God through her telling me to write these things down. So now we go to Chartres Cathedral. Are we having fun? This is a Penn world trip here. we go to Chartres Cathedral. So I was raised in Europe. I came to America when I was 9 years old, and so I was confirmed in Chartres Cathedral when I was 8 years old. And so if you don't know anything about confirmation, you pick a saint to be your pal and ride shotgun with you through your life. And so we all the boys had the white pressed shirts on and, the blue or brown khakis. And so I tapped the guy who was in front of me. I said, "What's your name?" He said, "It's Steve." So I took St. Stephen. I was really deep into the spirituality of that thing. But anyway, why am I bringing up Chartres Cathedral? Because I sponsor a guy here in town who is a Sufi, and he and his wife are Sufis. And so they were going to a world conference in Chartres Cathedral in France. So I said, well, great. So they get over there, and I get a call from the guy I sponsor, and he said, "Mickey, you're not going to believe this." He said, Caroline Myss is going to be one of the presenters in this Sufi conference. I said, "Oh, man, tell her I love her. Just tell her I love her." And so he said, "Okay." So he calls me the next day and he says, "You're not going to believe this. They said we can have lunch with any of the presenters we want." And he says, "I'm going to have lunch with Caroline Myss." I said, "Oh, man, tell her I love her, and tell her how much she has helped members of Alcoholics Anonymous to have a deeper spirituality, to get closer to God." And he said, "I'll do it." So he calls me back another day and he said, "Mickey, here's what happened. I did what you told me to do." And I told her, and he said there was a big silence, and she looked at me and she said, "You cannot know how much this means to me. My brother died of alcoholism and I couldn't help him. So to know that I've been helping so many alcoholics to come home to God means everything to me." Wow. If we're involved in this thing, there's a 12-step weekend somewhere in India that this guy was traveling to India took, that I facilitated. I got on an elevator at FOTS some years ago with this woman, and she looked at me and she said, "I want to thank you for saving my life." And I said, "What?" And she said, "I was in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and I was ready to give up this whole thing, and I heard you talk." Now, I'm not patting myself on the back. You guys have had these experiences. You know what I'm talking about. But it's like we don't know how far our message will go. And I want to tell this story too. New York. Gary and Marie and I talked at a Jesuit retreat place in Staten Island. And we ate at La Luna restaurant, which don't miss that. It's just the best food ever. But anyway.
Mount Marisa.
Mount Marisa, thank you. See, this is the team. Anyway, Mount Marisa. So, Mount Marisa. Oh, shoes and socks. My brain says, you think you're going to remember that? Click. So I'll get it. It's gone.
That's not Luna.
No, it's not. Yeah, we'll just stay with Luna. Anyway, so gosh, I know what it was. We were sitting up at the table to start this weekend, and so Gary and Marie and I were going to do this thing on the steps, And I started off saying something, and it was 2 weeks to Christmas. And it was colder than a brass toilet seat. And it was like, oh no. So I looked at this group of 125 people and I said, the last thing in the world that the place we wanted to be was in New York in this cold weather 2 weeks before Christmas. We've been traveling all year and we're really tired. And I can't believe that we're stuck with you rough New Yorkers. And I'm thinking, Mickey, you better shut up, and B, you're going to die. And I looked at them and I said, and we've never had a warmer welcome from any group that we've ever talked to this year. And so we really had a great time. Now, if you guys know, there's a gentleman named Scott S. out of Philadelphia. Anybody know about Scott S. out of Philadelphia? I'm looking at this guy while we're doing our weekend. And I don't know if you relate to this, but he had linebacker eyes. He just had linebacker eyes. And I'm looking at him and I'm saying inside myself, thank God I don't have to have anything to do with that guy. So we stopped the meeting and Scott walks right up to me and said, will you be my sponsor? I'm going to stop. I could tell you stories and stories and stories about people. I hope through God's good grace that this has been okay for you tonight. It's meant the world to me. I've had a kind of a rough week. I've been kind of sick. So anyway, I want to thank you for your attention. And I want to thank you again, Sarah, for the invitation. And now what do? We have something else we do or no?
Yes.